So it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Duncan Tait. I'm not going to recite all his many accomplishments. I should say we worked together at Fujitsu for quite a long time, so I'm very grateful for him to come. He's basically responsible for Fujitsu's IT business outside of Japan and parts of Southeast Asia, which work closely with Japan. So he's going to talk this time about the way in which, I can look at this, can't I, which is easier, this is the thing that I talked about, the idea of co-creation for success, working together between the provider, the user, and the contractor. And he's going to give us a view of how the world may change as a result of the application of the new technology. So Duncan.
Thank you very much, Richard. I'll take that just in case don't leave me stranded. So good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for coming along to listen to someone who knows nothing about marketing. I've been privileged to I started my life as a technologist, doing very detailed technical things on IBM mainframes. But I've been running businesses for the last 26 years. So my objective is to give you a view from a business leader about marketing. Now, Richard mentioned the fact that the world is going through great change. And they do say about change that change happens very slowly. And then, as we have discovered over the last few years, all at once. The whole world changes and goes completely crazy all at once. These themes that have led to this have been going on for some time. But you can see it everywhere, and this is changing the way the world works. It's changing the way that human beings work with each other. It's changing the nature of our work. It's changing how we build relationships, about how we function. It is fundamentally changing society and, of course, business. It is a tsunami of change. Now, let me make sure that my slides catch up with me. It would have been better if I'd said tsunami of change when this came up. Now, according to the World Bank, something like 30% of world GDP over about the next 5 to 10 years, that's about $60 trillion of world GDP, is going to move from established companies, like many of us in the room, to new players. That's a really frightening statistic, isn't it? 30% of your organization's revenues is going to move to somebody else. What are you going to do about this huge change? But we can already see it happening. You know, if you look at the performance of the US stock exchange, which, you know, it's going through this unprecedented bull market, it's actually based on the growth of a few technology companies. The massive companies in the US that we've looked to before, like GE and others, their revenue's kind of flatlining to declining. So you're already seeing the trend, but people don't necessarily feel it because the stock market feels like it's in super shape. But it is absolutely happening. So who are to be the new navigators in this tsunami of change? And I would put it to you that the people who have to help organizations navigate through this massive changing environment are the marketers. It is the marketing function who needs to take the lead to help organizations thrive in I am going to use the word, Richard, thrive in a digital world. That would be my challenge to our marketing colleagues. Now, the CEOs we talk to around the world, have you talked on the CEOs at the moment? Number one thing that comes out of them is revenue growth. How do I grow my company? Because the shareholders, they kind of know there's all sorts of stuff going on, but they've no interest. They want growing companies, improving earnings per share, growing value. So they want to know about revenue growth. They want to know about new business models. They want to know about talent. They want to make sure that their brand is trusted by their consumers or their customers now and into the future. And they want to make sure that their organizations are customer obsessed. Because the thing that this technology change has meant is that all of the digital companies, the way you interact with them is beautifully intuitive. You know, think about my children selling all of our household goods on eBay. It's really easy to do. They've sold most of our furniture to fund trips around the world for themselves, but it's really easy to do. They've set up businesses really easily. So if you're not customer obsessed and making sure that customers can interact with you in a really seamless way, consumers and customers in the future will find it unacceptable. So our belief is that CEOs and boards must flex their digital muscles. They must get used to, and Conway Cozy will talk about this later on in the day, they must flex their digital muscles. And we've done a lot of research on this topic, and Conway will cover that later on. Make sure we're on the right slide. So, therefore, unsurprisingly, boards have, whatever you want to call it, Industry 4.0, digital transformation, the technology revolution, whatever you want to call this thing, Industry 4.0, this thing is being talked about in every boardroom around the world. And it's not a technology conversation. It's about the impact of technology on businesses and the impact of technology on business models. How do we get value from the world's major companies to enable them to thrive in a digital world? How do they create value? And I would put it to you again, surely, yes, that this is in the heartland of marketing. Surely, the people who know about value creation in companies must be you. Must be you. And that noise. But you're going to have to change. Marketing people have got to change. You need to be the technology experts in the company. Strange, Richard, you mentioned the IT function before. You've got to be the technology experts. You've got to be the best at data analysis. As the world creates more data than's ever been created every year, you have got to be the people, surely, who are the data analysts in your companies and be able to use data to create value for companies. You've got to be the strategists, and you have to be the facilitators of change. And I would put it to you also, if you look at the second bullet on this slide, not only do you have to be the facilitator of change right across the organization, you're going to have to change your marketing function and the way your marketing team works also, if you are to be the navigators in this digital world. Now, people talk quite glibly, I think, about the fourth industrial revolution. All sorts of people talk about the fourth industrial revolution to me. Very few people really know the implications of the fourth industrial revolution. The first industrial revolution, and I'm going to give you a little lecture, forgive me if you already know. The first industrial revolution built on steam and iron. Huge productivity increases in the world based upon the first industrial revolution. The second one, electricity and telecommunications. The third one, and this is where we get confused with each other, the third one was the information age. It was about computing, and it was about mobile phone networks. But the fourth industrial revolution is about broad-based technologies and an intergalactic amount of data and connections. And it is the connections that are driving all the changes that we see in society. And as I said in my introduction, it is changing everything. It's fundamentally changing business and society. But if you think the world's gone mad so far, I can tell you, you have seen nothing yet. So we are about to unleash on the world the next generation of the internet. And the next generation of the internet means that every one of you are going to move from having a few internet addresses. You have them for your mobile phones, iPads. I'd rather you bought our technology, but iPads. You have them for your PCs at home. Those of you who have connected homes, all the sensors for your heating, your ability to run the bath from 6,000 miles away, all of these things have internet addresses. And you probably have a few tens of internet addresses each. But the great news is you're soon going to be able to have an octillion internet addresses each. Now, frankly, I've got to tell you, I have no idea what an octillion is. I just know it's a really, really big number. I am told reliably, if I can move, there we go, it's up. I am told reliably an octillion is about the number of molecules in a cat. They didn't tell me if this was kind of lion-sized cat or domestic cutie, but it's a lot of molecules, right? But it means that everything you can see around you, absolutely everything, could be connected to the internet. Absolutely everything. So if you think the world's gone crazy so far, built on broad-based technologies and massive connections, what's the world going to be like when we can, every last one of us on the planet can have an octillion internet addresses? On this slide, if I press the next button, you'll be able to see that's the current number of internet addresses that are available in the world. And then there's a slightly bigger number at the bottom for the number of internet addresses that will be available in the next generation of the internet. And it is almost here. Now, can you imagine the fundamental change that's going to mean to society and to business and how you create value? But then what we do is we take human creativity, and this has been the super thing if you look at technology advances over the last 10 years. You know, I remember saying, why would anyone need broadband at the speeds that some of my colleagues were talking about? Why would anyone need broadband of that speed? Well, I'll tell you why. If you've got 4 daughters in the house with you, you know you need fiber to the home to cope with them. And this has become, for me, one of the biggest service levels as a father that I have to deliver on, is the broadband capable of them doing all sorts of stuff, streaming videos, Snapchat, Facebook, and all this stuff. So the track record of human beings is as follows. Whatever technology capacity you throw at them, the human beings consume all of it and more, and the creativity is unbelievable. And I would put to you again, surely the marketing people can lead the creativity for our organizations, surely. Let's move on a little bit. Now, if we're going to be able to cope with the amount of data that's that is in our world, once we release the next generation of the internet, we're working on new technologies to be able to analyze the data. Because human beings simply won't be able to work with the volume of data that this new internet is going to generate. It's impossible. So there's a whole bunch of new technologies. You know many of them. So it's about artificial intelligence. It's about the Internet of Things. It's about quantum computing. And those of you who follow us pretty closely will know that we're the only company on the planet to released a quantum-like computer, not quite quantum yet, but about 18,000 times faster than any other computer on the planet today, that is beginning to enable us to process this volume of data. We're getting a lot of interest from car manufacturers around the world who are who know the amount of data they're going to collect from driverless vehicles, autonomous vehicles, is enormous. And banks who want to calculate risk on the fly. So these technologies are going to be absolutely essential. But imagine if they're in the hands of the marketing team. So you've got all that data, and then the marketing team has the new technologies, has artificial intelligence based on quantum computing. My word, you could make a difference to your companies. Now, of course, the changes aren't just about technology in the world, though. But technology is having a profound effect on work. So the number up above is 375 million, and that's the number of jobs the McKinsey Institute believes will just disappear by around 2030. So 375 million jobs in the world are going to change. But we can already see it. I can already see it in my industry about how automation and artificial intelligence is changing some of our core processes. So Conway, who runs our biggest business in Europe, some of the processes that are core to our business, we've been able to eliminate human input to about 95%. So the message, I was with our UK Workers' Council yesterday, the message to my people, but also the message to people in marketing functions and everything else is, you have to constantly update your skills if you're going to create value for yourselves and your companies in the longer term. And I think it's Gartner who said something like 90% of the jobs in the world for people who are entering schools now, by 2030, 90% of the jobs are going to go. I say to my 4 children, be very careful about what jobs you choose and be very careful to constantly update your skills. Now, what we haven't seen with the later industrial revolutions is the improvement in productivity, which we saw with the first industrial revolutions. But automation will absolutely change that. Automation and artificial intelligence will absolutely change it. So I think for marketing people, you have to rethink how you deliver value to your organizations. And bear in mind that you're going to have artificial intelligence and automation automating much of your work. So all the admin work is going to disappear. The drudgery of day-to-day life will disappear. So where are you going to deliver value to your organizations? But surely, as marketing is the center of creativity and value creation, you're going to go and figure it out. But my advice would be, do not stand still, because automation is coming up like, do you remember Pac-Man? Those Pac-Man things are coming around and they're biting. And they're going to bite you. So you have to move fast and reinvent yourself. Now, of course, we've spoken a lot about some of the technology trends, but there are also global megatrends that are affecting the world as well, which I think marketing people need to reflect on. A massively aging population, the death of distance, huge urbanisation that is going on in the world. Globalization, huge population growth. And I'd like to just take a look at a couple of areas. So if you take the area of an aging population, so we already see in places like Japan, 25% or more of the population are now retired. It's even going to affect economies like China, who you think is being a young economy. By 2050, over 30% of the Chinese population will be in retirement age. And this is putting public services under enormous strain as we all live longer, often with chronic illnesses. You could see what's happened to the NHS in our country, and another 20 billion that the government's allocated to the NHS. I mean, you just have to keep on throwing money after money after money to cope with this aging population. And it changes the dependency ratio. And the dependency ratio is the number of people who are children, age 14 or under, those and above retirement age, compared to the number of people who are in work. And this dependency ratio is going to get more and more tricky. Now, I've clearly mentioned countries in Asia, but this is affecting all Western European economies. It's largely places in the African continent that don't yet have this issue, but it's going to affect the whole world. I think as marketing people, you have to reflect about what does that mean and what opportunities does that generate. The other global trend is about urbanisation. So there are something like 1 million people a week moving from the countryside into cities. There are about 28 megacities around the world today with 10 million or more people, and this is just going to accelerate. But it's also going to create new cities, particularly in emerging economies. This is going to have a profound effect on the world. It's going to have a profound effect on supply chains, a profound effect as we create new middle classes right around the world, on food production, and how do you get food to these cities, and how do you service these new smart cities. So there are huge changes involved in this, and I think marketers need to understand what are the opportunities in these global megatrends. So now let's talk about a few other trends then, and I'm going to move back to technology. So the world feels very online to us, doesn't it, in the West? It feels very online. The reality is about 50% of the world is currently online. By 2030, it'll get to something like 70%. The growth is all going to be in emerging economies. And clearly, this new version of the internet is going to will accelerate this also. So the world online and the growth in emerging economies are something I think marketers need to consider. But then I want to go back to the topic of automation. So now you have a technology system around the world that is creating an enormous amount of data. This will accelerate when you add the next generation of the internet to it. We have the ability to process data using artificial intelligence, quantum computing. I think the stat is there's going to be a growth of something like 62% in industrial robots by 2019. And as I've said before, I can see the impact that automation is having on my industry and our core processes. So when you take all these things together, what you're going to be able to do in the marketing function is we have the ability to have hyper-personalization. In other words, you can analyze the whole world's data and market your product specifically to Richard Christou. Now, my experience of selling to Richard is it's very difficult. He never buys anything. But to anybody in the world, you're going to be able to have hyper-personalization. You'll be able to market to the individual based upon that whole world of data. No longer marketing to a big segment. You're going to be able to market very specifically to the people you want to go after. Now, we have GDPR considerations and all sorts of security considerations to put into place, but the opportunity is certainly there. If I can find my... Thank you very much for rescuing me then. Now, the other thing which data is doing, and you'll notice I'm talking a lot about data. The other thing that data is doing is fundamentally changing industries. Notice, Richard, I've been desperate not to mention the word digital for some time. But data, thank you. So data is changing industries, and it's changing from a product-out method that, say, for instance, the automobile manufacturers would have used some time ago, produce a car for a mass market, around put humans at the center of the way you think, and market accordingly using data to those humans. And then, previously, you know, in the world I grew up in, when my mother opened a bank account for me in 1970, banks delivered banking services. Remember when banks delivered banking services? It was only the banks that did it. And insurance companies sold you insurance, and car manufacturers manufactured cars. Oh my word, is that changing? Oh my word, is that changing? We did a survey of 11,000 banking consumers in Europe. And we asked them the question about if someone could add value to you by analysing your data in a safe way, would you consider buying financial services for them? And the answer from about 75% of the people was yes. So they're happy to buy banking services from Amazon, from Google, from whoever, from anybody. It doesn't have to be a bank. And it's fundamentally changing all industries. We call them digital arenas. They're based upon data and analytics from adjacent industries. So look at Ford Motor Company. You know, in my naive life, of course, I thought Ford Motor Company made cars. And they kind of do. But if you read or listen to what they say to their investors, actually what they want to be is a mobility services company. Mobility services company. Job of Ford, get you from A to B. Whether it's in taxis, one of their cars, trains, scooters, as I discovered in Washington, D.C. about 3 weeks ago, just get you from A to B. It means a massive change in the way Ford uses data and uses technology and software to enable a seamless journey from wherever you are to wherever you want to be. You saw Toyota announce, I think it was last week, an investment of about $500 million US into Uber. Is because Toyota knows where the game is going. So the concept of traditional industries is changing substantially. But doesn't just apply to the areas of car manufacture. It applies to financial services. It applies to insurance services. It applies to energy. I thought energy had these 30-year business plans. You know, build a massive power plant, invest 10 billion, get a lot of consumers buying your electricity, put your feet up and polish your nails. That business model is broken. And it's broken based upon data and technology. And then if you look at the area of healthcare, the world today, as you know, has a sick care system. So when we're unwell, we take use of, in this country, the NHS. But this has got to change to one where we produce a healthcare system for the world. Now, we've worked with the San Carlos Hospital in Madrid in the area of mental health, so drug addiction, alcohol dependency, and suicide risk. And we're using artificial intelligence, and that my favorite word of the day, thank you, data. And the machine learning engine, the AI engine we've built, is doing all the analysis of their patients to understand which ones have suicide risk. So this is freeing up all of those brilliant clinicians to go and do the real work, which is working with their patients in preventative measures and to improve the quality of their life, rather than doing all the analytics. And by the way, the analytics of our engine is as accurate or more than 700 years worth of experience of their clinicians. Now, I'm not saying the humans aren't brilliant, the humans are brilliant. And it's human beings on our side and our customers' side, the clinicians, who built this system together, Richard. So this is a co-creation approach, not ask the IT department to do something for you. But this is making a huge difference to the quality of life of their patients. But we can apply this right across the healthcare system. And again, it is based upon data, artificial intelligence, analytics, but done in a human way. So hopefully you can see by now, and I think Richard mentioned it earlier on, that this isn't about you being brilliant at social media. We love social media today in my industry. We're able to kind of target people roughly using LinkedIn and Facebook and other mechanisms so they kind of see Fujitsu all the time. But if you think that's the job of marketing, this is a recipe for the Pac-Man game. You really, really have to think about where is the value, and the value must be in understanding what data your company needs to thrive, producing the analytics around it that make an impact to the company's performance. And now, many of you will sigh when you see this, because of course, there's all sorts of people who say, the real thing, you know, is about data is the new oil. Everyone says it. The thing we would say is drill deep. drill really deep into that data to produce the analytics that your company needs. And I'll give you an example of one of I'll try and keep the customer confidential, but I'll give you an idea about where we're working. So we're working with one of the world's biggest drinks manufacturers. And initially we were working with them in the area of using the Internet of Things to help them with asset control, to understand where this huge balance sheet of assets were anywhere around the world at any time. If they lose any one of these assets, it's $500,000 of profit every time they lose one of these assets. So there's a real business case for the customer to use the Internet of Things. We're connecting at least 50 million assets to the internet to help them do this. But that's not particularly interesting. They know they can save money. They know it's a good business case. They did it in 12 weeks with us. But the real thing is, for fast-moving consumer goods companies, we're at the point of being able to print sensors onto labels. We're about to be able to print sensors onto labels. We have some prototypes going inside Fujitsu in some FMCG companies today. But if you imagine you put sensors on the label, this comes back to what I was talking about, a hyper-connected world. It gives FMCG companies the ability to have a relationship with the end consumer. They've always had the wholesaler, the distributor, the supermarket in between them. But FMCG companies can now talk directly to the end consumer using that sensor. And the sensor will know where it is the bottle half full or half empty, and you can establish, and the direct relationship you can establish, you can then send them recipe ideas. You can tell them when they're running out, you can direct them to Amazon, Waitrose, whoever, to replenish the stocks. But just imagine the possibilities if we add sensors to everything that's around you from a manufacturing perspective. And it also has the possibility of helping supply chains. So if you're serving a city like London, when all of the inventory in London knows how much it can, sorry, let me say that again. The inventory will know when it needs replenishing. Have a huge impact on supply chains in my view. Now, let's move on to the topic of trust. Now, if data is the way to create new value, it's always been true that customer loyalty, consumer loyalty, has to be based upon trust. And I'll go back to that banking survey I mentioned. So, my mother opened that bank account for me in 1970. I am still with the same bank. They're kind of okay. But I'm of a generation where we don't change our banks. We tend to stick with banks. But if you're under the age of 30, 65% of you will have changed your bank account during your third decade. You will absolutely have changed. And the consumer evidence says as follows, which is, we're happy for you to analyze our data. We're happy for you to store our data. Give me better value on my insurance, my bank accounts, my mortgages. But if you lose my data, I'm going to move. You can see that recently, one example in the UK. I think they've lost 22,000 customers. Let's not mention the name of the bank. But they have lost 22,000 customers because of a breach of data. So if you're going to have all this data, you better look after it. And I think as marketing people, you have to understand you are the guardians of trust. You're the guardians of trust with the people who buy your stuff. And you have to get savvy on how to protect that data. Now, of course, it means companies need chief information security officers and da-da-da-da-da, but you need to understand it. And you need to understand how technologies like blockchain, which of course we all associate with Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, how technologies like blockchain can hold information securely and openly at the same time. But if you're in the marketing function, you have to get how you're going to protect data because you are the guardians of trust. And we're using blockchain in Europe to hold citizen data to register births, deaths, and marriages. using blockchain in a completely open system so everybody can see the data, but the data is protected. And we're using it in Japan for restaurant bookings. So rather than having to ring up for your restaurant booking, we're using blockchain so you can see into the restaurant and reserve the particular table you want. I say again, if you're going to have all this data, you need to be the guardians of trust. And if you're not the guardians of trust, and you lose company data, your customers' data, they will leave you in droves. So, if we want to get all this done, we need to get moving. We need to get moving. And I would put it to you that doing this work on your own is going to take a long time. So our research would say that those customers who work in co-creation with their partners and their supply chain get results faster than doing it on their own. Furthermore, I would say if you do it on your own, you're going to do it slowly and you're going to get left behind. And in the world in which we live in now, which is this hyper-connected, technology-driven world, you can't afford to get left. You can't afford to get left behind. And many companies think, don't worry, I can do it via skills. I can retrain people and I can bring new skills into my company. The reality says that all companies are trying to do this, but the vast majority of them say there is a huge skills shortage. And there is, I promise you, an enormous skills shortage in the world in the areas that people that can drive this type of technology. So you have to partner. But let me give you some examples about where we've partnered with customers to get results done quickly that drive business performance. So with S Group, they're a retailer and own petrol forecourts throughout the Nordics. So they worked with us to understand how they can drive revenue up. It took us 8 weeks. We built a new app with them, not for them, with them. It's been downloaded 600,000 times. And within 8 weeks, we'd driven transactions at the pump up by 500%. But this is based on co-creation and data and technology. And it would be wrong of me not to reinforce the fact that although the world's massively technology rich, this is done by people. It's done by people. The people are enormously important. And then in Belfius is Belgium's largest bank. They provide insurance and banking services. They wanted to grow their online bank. One of the impediments to growing online is people signing up for bank accounts in the first place. Any of you that's opened a bank account recently will know what a painful process it is. We worked with Belfius again in co-creation, brilliant technologists from Fujitsu with brilliant people from Belfius. And we've produced a digital sign-on app which enables them to sign up a new customer in 5 minutes. Their online platform has grown between 30 and 50% month on month as a result of this piece of technology. And this is driven by the marketing people inside Belfius working with the technology people from Fujitsu. And to enable us to do this, we've built these co-creation centers. So we think it's important that we co-create with customers, overcomes your skill shortages, and produces results rapidly. And we've opened digital co-creation centers clearly in Japan. We've opened a new one in Munich, one in New York, and now one in London just down the road from here, and Conway will talk more about these later on. So it would be wrong of me to say that Fujitsu isn't changing as a result of everything that I've spoken about today. And you know, I think for marketers inside Fujitsu, those people with energy, drive and imagination, they're changing our company. They're using AI and IoT and cyber and cloud, which are the cornerstones of digital transformation, to change our company and to change the nature of our relationships with our customers. I'm trying to live the dream that I said earlier on, that marketers are the place where value is in a company. So you'll be pleased to hear that I'm going to come to a close. It is sink or swim time for people in the marketing function. You are the people who are the value creators. You should be the people who understand the technology, the data, the strategy, and to be facilitators of change for the whole company and clearly for the marketing function. We're having to do it inside Fujitsu. I hope you are able to do it in your organizations and with the customers you represent. But this could be enormously exciting for those of you who have drive, energy, and imagination. Thank you very much.